Playing with Power MTG. Powerful cards, powerful formats. Before we get into tonight's game, I wanted to ask a question. Do you have extra cards lying around that you don't use? Want to buy or trade for some extra cards but don't know how to maximize the value? Then you should try out today's sponsor, Card Conduit. Card Conduit is the best service when it comes to selling your extra cards. Don't waste hours trying to find the best buy list price for your cards online. Simply send them to Card Conduit and let them take care of the rest. I have used Card Conduit multiple times already. I always use them to get the best value for my extra cards. I get fair prices for my cards and they save me tons of time. They have three main services. Their standard service lets you send them your unsorted cards of any value. They will sort, grade, and give you the best price for your cards. Their curated service is similar. Send them your unsorted cards worth over $1 in value. They will charge half the fee of the standard service and charge no fee per card. Their sorted service is a great value as well. Choose cards in advance with their selection tool, send them sorted to Card Conduit, and they will grade and buy list them automatically. Save yourself the time of having to send to multiple sites and let Card Conduit do it instead. Their fee is only 2% with no fee per card. They give you the best price for your cards. They work with competitive buy listing partners, including ones not open to the public. Users get an average of 19% more for their collection than they would from any major retail buy list, even with Card Conduit's fees. Card Conduit also optimizes buy listing for card condition as well. Since vendors have different penalties for wear and tear, Card Conduit will find the best buy list priced against the specific condition of the card. So give Card Conduit a try today. If you sign up with my link in the description below or use the promo code POWER, you will also get 10% off of their fees when you use their service. A big thanks to Card Conduit for sponsoring today's video. Now, let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have Sean piloting the partner pair of Malcom Keen-Eyed Navigator and Vial Smasher the Fierce. This deck, called Grixis Pirates, seeks to land a number of different combos including Glenhorn, Breach, Brain Freeze, and Thoracle. Sean's opening hand contains a Rhystic Study, Lotus Petal, Narset Parter of Veils, Underworld Breach, Volcanic Island, Arid Mesa, and a Bloodstained Mire. Next, we have Philip piloting Abdel Adrian Gorian's Ward with Candlekeep Sage as a background. This deck seeks to control the board, accrue value, and eventually win with a Labman type effect. Philip's opening hand contains a Flooded Strand, Mystic Remora, Esper Sentinel, Oblivion Ring, Mox Diamond, Moonblessed Cleric, and an Arcane Signet. After that, we have Ryan piloting Jhoira Weatherlight Captain. This is an artifact storm deck seeking to draw a bunch of cards with its commander and go off using Displacer Kit. Ryan's opening hand contains a Mana Crypt, Ethereum Sculptor, Cyclonic Rift, Command Tower, Flusterstorm, Experimental Synthesizer, and his London Mulligan is an Enthusiastic Mechanaut. Finally, we have Cal piloting Marwyn the Nurturer. This is a mono-green storm deck seeking to cast a lot of elves, draw a lot of cards, and win with big creatures. Cal's opening hand contains a Fierce Empath, Arbor Elf, Mana Crypt, Yavimaya Cradle of Growth, Kogla the Titan Ape, Invigorate, and a snow-covered forest. Without further ado, let's kick off this Jealous Jagged Jovial Jamboree. Sean wins the Duct Tape Challenge and gets to start us off. Sean draws a card for turn and plays an Arid Mesa. He casts a Lotus Petal. He cracks his Arid Mesa, pays a life, and fetches up a Badlands onto the battlefield. Sean passes. Philip draws and plays a Flooded Strand. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Tundra onto the battlefield. He casts a turn 1 Mystic Remora. Philip passes. Ryan draws and plays a Command Tower. He casts a Mana Crypt and Philip draws from Remora. He casts Ethereum Sculptor. Ryan ends his turn. Cal draws and plays a Snow-Covered Forest. He casts his own Mana Crypt and Philip draws again. He casts his commander, Marwyn the Nurturer. Cal ships it over to Sean. Sean draws and plays a Volcanic Island. He casts a Rhystic Study. Remora triggers and Philip draws. Sean passes. During his upkeep, Philip pays to keep his Remora. He draws and plays a Plains. He casts a Mox Diamond and Sean draws from Rhystic. Diamond resolves and Philip discards a Plains. He casts Esper Sentinel and Sean draws from Rhystic. He casts a Mana Crypt and Sean draws again. He casts Moonblessed Cleric and Sean draws. It enters and Philip fetches up a Smothering Tithe onto the top of his library. Philip gives the turn to Ryan. During his upkeep, Ryan wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws, plays an Ancient Tomb, and passes. During his upkeep, Cal wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws and plays a Yavimaya Cradle of Growth. He casts Fierce Empath, Rhystic triggers, and Sean draws. Empath enters, Marwyn triggers, and gets a +1/+1 counter. Then Empath triggers, and Cal fetches up a Great Oak Guardian into his hand. Cal casts Invigorate for its alternate cost, targeting Marwyn with Philip getting 3 life. Rhystic, Remora, and Esper trigger. Cal pays for Esper, then Sean and Philip draw. Then Marwyn gets +4/+4 until the end of turn. Cal casts Great Oak Guardian, and Sean draws from Rhystic. Guardian enters, and Cal's creatures get +2/+2 until the end of turn, untapping them. He casts Kogla, the Titan Ape, paying the Rhystic tax. It enters and fights Esper Sentinel, killing it. Finished up, and in a good spot on turn 2 already, Cal passes the turn. Sean draws and plays a Flooded Strand. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. He casts a Lion's Eye Diamond, and Philip draws from Remora. He casts Underworld Breach, and Philip draws. He casts Demonic Consultation and Remora triggers. Sean holds priority and cracks his LED, discards his hand, and adds 3 black. Then Philip draws from Remora. In response, Ryan casts Cyclonic Rift, targeting Underworld Breach. Mystic and Rhystic trigger, Ryan pays for Rhystic, and Philip draws from Mystic. Then Breach bounces, and Sean is left in a pretty weird spot. So then Consultation resolves, and Sean names Demonic Tutor. He exiles the top 6, and then exiles until he reveals Demonic Tutor, putting it into his hand. He casts Demonic Tutor, and Philip draws. Sean fetches up a card into his hand, and unfortunately, has to pass the turn. During his upkeep, Philip loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He also lets his Remora die. He draws and casts a Mox Opal. Rhystic triggers, and Sean draws. He plays a Mana Confluence for turn. He taps it to cast Wrath, Weatherlight Stalwart, and Sean draws from Rhystic. Philip casts Trinket Mage, and Sean draws. Trinket Mage enters, and Philip fetches up a Mana Vault into his hand. He casts Mana Vault, and Sean draws. In response, Sean pays 2 life to cast Mental Misstep, countering Mana Vault. Philip moves to combat and attacks Sean with Moonblessed Cleric. Sean takes it, and Philip ends his turn. During his upkeep, Ryan wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws and plays an Otawara, Soaring City. He casts his commander, Jhoira, Weatherlight Captain, tapping his Ancient Tomb to pay the Rhystic tax. He casts Everflowing Chalice where X equals 0, paying the Rhystic tax again. Jhoira triggers and Ryan draws. All through, Ryan passes. During his upkeep, Cal wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and moves to combat. He attacks Ryan with Great Oak Guardian and Sean with Kogla. Kogla triggers and destroys Sean's Rhystic Study. Then they both take it, and in his second main phase, Cal casts an Arbor Elf. Marwyn triggers and gets a counter. He casts Garruk, Primal Hunter. In response, Philip casts Spell Pierce, targeting Garruk. Wrath triggers, and Philip taps 2 creatures, drawing a card. Then Spell Pierce counters Garruk, and Cal sends the turn to Sean. Sean draws and plays a Spire of Industry. He casts a Soul Ring. He casts a Mystic Remora. He casts his commander, Malcom, Keen-Eyed Navigator. Back in the game already, Sean passes to Philip. During his upkeep, Philip loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays an Urza Saga, getting its first counter. He casts Smothering Tithe, and Sean draws from Rhystic. He casts Oblivion Ring. Rhystic triggers and Sean draws. Tithe triggers and Philip creates a treasure. Oblivion Ring enters and exiles Kogla. With nothing else, Philip ends his turn. During his upkeep, Ryan wins his Mana Crypt flip. He draws, paying for Smothering Tithe. He takes no other actions and passes the turn. During his upkeep, Cal loses his Mana Crypt flip and takes 3 damage. He draws, Tithe triggers, and Philip creates a treasure. In his main phase, Cal plays a Snow-Covered Forest. He casts an Arcane Signet, paying for Remora. He moves to combat and attacks Philip with Great Oak Guardian. Philip takes it, and Cal ends his turn. During his upkeep, Sean pays for his Remora. He draws and plays a Smothering Tithe. He plays an Ancient Tomb for turn. He taps his Ancient Tomb to cast Underworld Breach. In response, Philip casts Mana Leak, targeting Breach. Wrath and Remora trigger. Sean draws, Tithe triggers, and Philip creates a treasure. Then Philip taps 2 creatures through Wrath to draw a card. In response, Sean hard casts Force of Negation. Force counters Mana Leak, and Underworld Breach resolves. Sean escapes Lion's Eye Diamond. In what feels like deja vu, Philip casts Cyclonic Rift, targeting Underworld Breach. Remora triggers and Sean draws. Tithe triggers and Philip creates a treasure. Then Underworld Breach bounces to Sean's hand. He moves to combat and attacks Philip with Malcom. Philip takes it, Malcom triggers, and Sean creates a treasure. Stopped twice in a row now, Sean passes to Philip. During his upkeep, Philip wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws, and in his first main phase, Urza Saga gets another counter. He casts an Arcane Signet. Remora triggers, Sean draws, Tithe triggers, and Philip creates a treasure. He casts Rhystic Study. Sean draws, and Philip creates a treasure. In response, Sean casts Fierce Guardianship for its alternate cost, countering Rhystic Study. Next, Philip casts Spellseeker. It enters, and Philip fetches up an Ephemerate into his hand. Finished up, Philip passes to Ryan. During his upkeep, Ryan loses his Mana Crypt flip and takes 3 damage. He draws and pays for Smothering Tithe. He casts Pyrite Spellbomb. Jhoira and Remora trigger. Sean declines to draw so Philip doesn't get more treasures, and then Ryan draws through Jhoira. Tithe triggers, and Philip creates a treasure. With nothing else, Ryan ends his turn. During his upkeep, Cal loses his Mana Crypt flip and takes 3 damage. He draws and pays for Smothering Tithe. He plays a Homeward Path for turn. He casts Shared Summons. Remora triggers, Sean draws, Tithe triggers, and Philip creates a treasure. Then Shared Summons resolves, and Cal fetches up a Regal Forest and an Allosaurus Shepherd into his hand. He casts Allosaurus Shepherd. Marwyn triggers and gets a counter. Cal sends the turn to Sean. During his upkeep, Sean pays for his Remora. He draws, tapping his Ancient Tomb to pay for Smothering Tithe. He plays a Morphic Pool for turn. He casts an Arcane Signet. He moves to combat and attacks Philip with Malcom. Philip takes it, Malcom triggers, and Sean creates a treasure. Sean passes. At the end of Sean's turn, Philip casts Ephemerate, targeting his Spellseeker. Wrath and Remora trigger, Sean draws, and Philip creates a treasure. In response to Wrath, Sean casts Fire Covenant, paying 5 life, targeting Spellseeker, Ethereum Sculptor, and Allosaurus Shepherd. The creatures die, then Wrath's trigger resolves, then Ephemerate fizzles. The turn moves to Philip. During his upkeep, Philip loses his mana crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws, and in his first main phase, Urza's Saga triggers. He floats mana and then sacrifices it, fetching up a Soul Ring onto the battlefield. He casts Savine's Reclamation, targeting Spellseeker in his graveyard. Remora triggers, and Sean declines to draw due to Smothering Tithe. Then Savine's resolves, and Spellseeker returns to the battlefield. It enters, and Philip fetches up a Silence into his hand. He casts Silence. Remora triggers, Sean draws, Tithe triggers, and Philip creates a treasure. In response, Ryan casts Dispel, targeting Silence. Sean draws from Remora, and Philip creates a treasure through Tithe. In response, Philip casts Swansong, targeting Dispel. Wrath and Remora trigger, Sean draws, Tithe triggers, and Philip creates a treasure. In response to Wrath, Sean casts Flusterstorm with all copies targeting Silence. Flusterstorm counters Silence, then Philip taps 2 creatures through Wrath to draw a card. Then Swansong counters Dispel, and Ryan creates a 2/2 bird. Next, Philip plays an Ancient Tomb for turn. He taps it and his Mana Confluence to cast Eldrazi Displacer. This is game over for the table with Abdel, so in response, Ryan casts Pact of Negation. Sean draws, and Philip creates a treasure. Then Pact counters Displacer. Next, Philip flashes back Savine's Reclamation, targeting Eldrazi Displacer in his graveyard. Sean draws from Remora, and Philip creates a treasure. In response, Ryan casts Flusterstorm with all copies targeting Savine's. Remora triggers, and Sean declines to draw. Then Flusterstorm counters Savine's. All out of actions and stopped every way to Sunday, Philip passes to Ryan. During his upkeep, Ryan loses his Mana Crypt Flip and takes 3 damage. Also in his upkeep, he taps his Ancient Tomb to help pay for his Pact of Negation. He draws and plays a City of Brass. He moves to combat and attacks Philip with everything. Philip takes it, and Ryan passes to Cal. During his upkeep, Cal loses his Mana Crypt Flip and takes 3 damage. He draws, Tithe triggers, and Philip creates a treasure. He casts Might of Old Croja, targeting his Marwyn. Sean draws from Remora, and Philip creates a treasure. Then Marwyn gets +4/+4. Cal casts Regal Force. It enters, and Cal draws 5 cards. Tithe triggers, and Philip creates 5 treasures. Cal casts Harmonize. Remora triggers, Sean draws, and Philip creates a treasure. Then Cal draws 3, and Philip creates 3 more treasures. He plays a Snow-Covered Forest for turn. He casts Survival of the Fittest. Remora triggers, Sean draws, and Philip creates a treasure. In response, Sean casts Mindbreak Trap for its alternate cost, exiling Survival. Next, Cal casts Wild Growth. Sean draws, and Philip creates a treasure. He casts Reclamation Sage. It enters, and Marwyn gets a counter. Reclamation Sage triggers and destroys Oblivion Ring. Then Kogla enters, triggers, and fights Spellseeker, killing Spellseeker. Cal casts Birds of Paradise. He moves to combat and attacks Philip with Fierce Empath and Sean with Great Oak Guardian. They both take it, and Cal passes the turn. During his upkeep, Sean lets his Remora die. He draws, and Philip creates a treasure. He plays a Shivan Reef for turn. He casts Reanimate, targeting Philip's Spellseeker in his graveyard. Spellseeker enters, and Sean loses 3 life. Spellseeker triggers, and Sean fetches up a Swansong into his hand. He casts Chrome Mox, imprinting Animate Dead. He casts Siren Stormtamer. He casts Underworld Breach. He casts Brain Freeze, with all copies targeting himself, milling some of his library. He cracks his LED, discards his hand, adding 3 blue. He escapes Lotus Petal. He escapes LED. He cracks both Lotus Petal and LED for 4 blue total. He escapes LED and cracks it for 3 black. He escapes LED and cracks it for 3 more blue. He escapes Brain Freeze repeatedly, milling out his opponents. Sean passes, sacrificing Underworld Breach. One by one, each opponent attempts to draw from an empty library, lose, and Sean wins the game. Ladies and gentlemen, what a cool game. So many players were firing off left and right, trying to close out the game. It was an awesome game we played, and we hope you enjoyed watching it tonight. Congrats to Sean on his win. There's nothing quite like trying to resolve Underworld Breach 3 separate times over 3 turns. At least the 3rd time was the charm, as he was finally able to close out the game after stalling his opponents over and over again. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more like this, be sure to subscribe. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Tune in next time when we duke it out to see who will be king of the competitive EDH table. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.